Welcome to DC Insiders, where we bring you sharp views about global issues with relevance to Taiwan from the political capital of the world, here in Washington, DC. I'm your host, Wenchi Yu. Geopolitical tensions have accelerated the integration of emerging technologies into defense strategies. Last year, Taiwan's Defense Ministry established a military technology unit to integrate the development of military and civilian technology to boost the island's asymmetrical warfare capabilities when facing growing military threats from China. Today, our guest is Garrett of 137 Ventures and a co-founder of the Hill and Valley Forum, an annual convening of bipartisan lawmakers and Silicon Valley leaders to align technology and national security strategies. So welcome, Christian.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So we're very excited about the annual Hill and Valley Forum, which you co-founded. So tell us why you co-founded this forum. This is the fourth year, is that right?
Yeah, this is the fourth year. It's crazy how time flies. We started this 4 years ago. The genesis for the forum was actually Jacob Helberg, who's now coming in as the Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth.
He's also a past guest of TaiwanPlus.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, so during his Palantir days, I would imagine. And he and I were having a chat together at this conference, and we were discussing why there wasn't a dinner at the time that existed that sort of got top tech leaders together with top policymakers. So we were thinking folks in Congress who were kind of forward-thinking on policy. In my mind was envisioning this 12-person dinner that people got together. At the time, it was just very clear, not just sort of the growing reality that we were in great power competition with China, but also seeing the need for America to invest more in getting the best technology in the hands of government and also leveraging its tech sector to compete more. And so we had this conversation. I thought it was going to happen, but like all good ideas, you sort of continue on. And I get a call the next day, and Jacob called Delian, who's another mutual friend of ours from Founders Fund, and said, hey, I spoke to Delian, we're kind of having the same ideas and we should do this.
Yeah.
And we hopped on a Zoom a week later, and Jacob had an events team, which meant that this was not going to be some small dinner, it was going to be a little bit bigger. And over the last 4 years, it's definitely grown.
Tremendously. I've participated, every year.
It's great. I think we have a real privilege in gathering our ecosystem together alongside the top leaders within government and trying to build bridges between Silicon Valley and Capitol Hill.
Well, one of the things I like and I find especially inspiring is three very young Silicon Valley guys from the VC ecosystem actually initiated this idea. Because I remember even 10, 15 years ago, there's always the connection between Silicon Valley and Washington, DC. But somehow you guys were able to pull this together for the first time, right? And especially around from the aspect of national security, which I really want to focus on in our conversation today. We're in the second Trump administration now. What do you see as the opportunities for the Silicon Valley innovation and the defense industry in particular coming together?
Yeah, I mean, look, circling back, this is something I care a ton about. Overall, I think the private industry, it's their duty to spend time with policymakers to help educate them on the areas where they have expertise in their industry. As a policymaker, it's a very difficult job to try to craft policy that keeps your constituents happy, that tries to accomplish sort of the goals or the agenda.
And let's be honest, most senators are probably too old to...
Well, and that's the other case is you have to have opinions on subjects that you know very little about.
Right.
Most people don't know a lot about 1,000 different subjects anyway, so it's a very unfair job that they're thrown into. And so I think it's business leaders and industry leaders to spend time with folks to try to give them information, try to give them counter arguments and arguments, and help them have the best data to make good decisions from the folks that are closest to it. Also, I've just grown very passionate about this because I got to see my grandfather was Bernard Garrett Sr., who was one of the first black entrepreneurs after the 1960s to buy real estate and built wealth through real estate during the height of the Jim Crow era, and was the first black man to own banks in the country. He was very successful at that time and leveraged the fact that he had incredible relationships due to that success to be a real champion for the civil rights era and spent a lot of time with President Johnson at the time. And so, although a very different focus, it instilled in me this reality of if you're very blessed and fortunate to have success and knowledge in an industry, you should spend time on anything that matters to you from a policy perspective, whether it pertains to your business or something else, to try to help policymakers work on that. And
so it runs in your family in terms
100%, yeah, and it's an example that I've seen, and so I look up now, and it's awesome to sort of play and be able to act on that kind of similar passion and play a similar role. And the tech industry overall, what does it care about? What are the focuses, right? I think you've seen consistent themes across this growing need and importance for the defense industry to modernize.
When did you guys start to notice that, oh my God, the defense industry needs modernization?
Look, people have been, there's like various forms of when did it start, right? When did people start talking about this as a problem? And when did people actually start, caring
doing
about
it, yeah.
doing it? And those are always two different things.
Right.
I think people started caring about this really around the time when Palantir was formed, which was really for the first kind of critical problem facing our military, which was how to do counterterrorism. The 2000s onward, we started to see these problems. It really came to the helm, the 2010s onward. And that's when you obviously saw companies like Anduril form. But I would say, that this has been a problem people have been talking about for decades. And it really is post kind of seeing that the rest of the world has played a different game and caught up. Instead of trying to have the same exquisite military platforms and systems that we kind of spent Cold War and post-Cold War building out, they focused on competing against us to catch up in other capabilities. And where the future what kind of war is going are towards these autonomous systems, AI, software-defined hardware systems, mass unmanned attritable systems, and that's where we need to reorient and repurpose our workforce.
I want to hear more about those industries that you just mentioned, right? Aerospace is a big one, energy, semiconductors, Taiwan cares a lot about, other hardware, even fintech, health tech, the entire ecosystem can really leverage the innovation coming from tech. What are some of the most exciting things you're seeing these days? And also your portfolio, right? Your company has, we can talk about, what fancy companies you guys have invested in. But let's start with some of the industries.
One of the exciting things is that you sort of are seeing the rest of our allies who are critical to even how we think about defense and deterrence, adopting the same mindset and taking defense and modernization of their military forces very seriously. So as you know, Taiwan has a plan to get to $20 million of defense spending. They've recently partnered with Palantir and Northrop Grumman on adding these kind of complex big data systems in order to manage and monitor their assets. And I think that trend is just going to continue. And so for me overall, it's like the broader allies part of the U.S. and its allies are also investing heavily here.
So it's not just the U.S.
No, it's spreading. It's spreading. I think that's exciting. And so the trend that's happening here is spreading. And overall, that is important and needs to happen for effective deterrence. And I think you're also seeing a realization that, okay, we need to get better at procurement and helping startups compete. We need to get better at allowing innovation as such. We need to get better at buying more software and modernizing our systems. But the fourth piece, right, the future of war is going to look like having what we see in Russia, Ukraine, a lot more unmanned systems, a lot more mass and attritable systems. We're talking about drones, we're talking about autonomous jets, we're talking about more air defense and autonomous defense capabilities, cheaper missiles that we can mass produce. And I think that's what you're seeing.
Robots?
I think robotics will have various use cases, but you're looking at really current systems that are adapted for kind of the new war, where you're going to have a lot cheaper mass out there. And so, for example, like in the Red Sea, with a tens of thousands of dollar drone being taken out by missiles that cost hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, that ratio just doesn't make sense.
Right.
And if you can't manufacture those missiles at a fast capacity, you're going to deplete your munitions arsenal very fast. And so this is what's exciting, is now folks are realizing we have a manufacturing problem. And I think Russia, Ukraine really highlighted that. I think the Red Sea has highlighted that. And
COVID in a way also.
COVID highlighted that across other industries as well.
Right.
And so people are seeing within defense we have a problem. Like we've depleted certain types of munitions just in the Ukraine conflict in a matter of weeks. That is a huge problem. And so I think a big focus now are not just these next generation of capabilities, technologies, particularly around drones and autonomous vehicles and weapons and missiles, but also around how we can manufacture and mass produce them.
So on that, I think this year's theme is reindustrialization, right? And so tell us, what are you guys going to discuss? And specifically, Jensen Huang, just so you know, I know he's a guest. Chinese are crazy about him. He's originally from Taiwan.
Yes.
So how is the semiconductor industry tied into the overall conversation?
Oh, I mean, it's critical. Everything that we're talking about here is reliant on chips that go into power, into these most advanced chips. And so I think it's critical. If you're going to invest more in producing mass and invest more in technology, you're then de facto going to be more reliant on trying to mass produce chips. And it's important that we continue to support our incredible partners and allies that are a key part of the growing move to friendshore more of that capacity and support them and protect them. And then also, how can we partner with them to develop that those capabilities and capacity here domestically, and that's a big part of the conversation. How can we build sort of the next set of fabs here in the US and train talent here in partnership with our allies, and how can we also make sure that we invest in deterrence to make sure our allies are protected?
TSMC has been investing a lot in the United States.
Yeah.
I don't know if you follow, but it's been quite a controversial issue in Taiwan because there's a lot of concern that the semiconductor industry may be hollowed out of Taiwan. What is your view of that?
The partnership with Taiwan has been obviously incredible, longstanding. They have invested a ton here in the US, which has been great in helping shore up our domestic capacity.
Is the intent to bring everything out of Taiwan or keeping?
I think what you've seen from the last administration and this administration has been a focus on bringing more capabilities here, but it has not been a shift away. And if you just look at the current nanometer capabilities that they're investing in here, that is just one piece of the stack.
Right.
So you're never going to bring the entire manufacturing capability here. You want to have the ability for it to have resilience.
Right.
And just like any company, you also want to have a distributed supply chain in order to have resilience as well. And so I think what you're seeing is a focus on building resilience, not a focus on trying to decouple away from our allies.
Now let's take a quick break. You're watching DC Insiders on TaiwanPlus. We will be back in a moment.
I'm Leslie Liao in New York City, and this is TaiwanPlus News, a voice of freedom in Asia.
Welcome back to DC Insiders. Today we're talking to Garrett of 137 Ventures about this year's Hill and Valley Forum. I want to talk about, since we're talking about reindustrialization, it's more than just bringing, the capabilities here from other countries, but also investing in the United States. And on that, there's so many ways to do that, right? From, the talent we're talking about, when TSMC is investing here, one thing they constantly complain about is just not having the right engineering talent. So how do we address that? And also coupled with that is the immigration policies, even a lot of funding and grants to higher ed and science and technology kind of development. And we know this administration kind of takes a slightly different approach. I'm not putting you in the spot of trying to explain for the administration, but coming from Silicon Valley, what is the view generally there on those issues?
Yeah, I think Silicon Valley is always going to prioritize making sure that we have policy that can create abundance. We have policy that supports innovation, and we have policy that supports entrepreneurs. My favorite quote about my second favorite quote about America is the business of America is business. The first, ironically, is Winston Churchill's quote that America always does the right thing after it's exhausted every other option. But with that, like investing in industry and having a regulatory environment and having a policy focus that supports industry and the technology industry is going to always be the focus. And so with that, all these are very critical parts, right? Most of the companies that are founded, these tech companies, are founded by immigrants or children of immigrants. A lot of the tech force and a lot of our most talented folks have come here as immigrants, and will continue to be supportive of, and if you see, it's very bipartisan, a focus on trying during this administration, which the administration has also been openly supportive of. From what I hear around figuring out how to have targeted and skilled immigration for some of these critical needs. One of them obviously
especially
being advanced manufacturing.
Yeah, high skilled.
Correct. And so I think you're going to see the tech community continue to push for that. And I think the last administration and this administration have been vocal. I think across the aisle in Congress, people have been vocal about trying to get there. So I think we'll be really hopeful that you see something there around high skilled immigration. I think around the labor pool and increasing opportunities, I personally am very excited about, and I think more companies and more folks in government are talking a lot more about how to scale up and bring more trade schools. What TSMC is doing here is really good in trying to reskill folks, and I think we need to see a lot more of that. And I think, quite frankly, that's a more effective and high leverage way to solve some of the other problems that hurt our country, which is, de facto, it indirectly leads to a wealth and income gap that we need to solve, which is how can we fix the education system and try to train up the next labor force for where the best jobs and the best opportunity is going to be. And one of those areas are going to be on working on semiconductor fabs and more advanced manufacturing and various other needs that are critical from a national security perspective. And so, I think you see the tech community talking about trade schools. I think you see them talking about skilled immigration and what that looks like. I think you see them trying to focus on energy, because that's going to be a huge constraint for even bringing back this manufacturing, and definitely for semiconductors and data centers. So I think you're also seeing a focus on even lower down in the supply chain on where there's also constraints, like from a mining and refining perspective, and bringing some of that capacity back domestically. So I think all these things, hit broadly on what's relevant for Taiwan and TSMC in particular. And I think the tech community is pretty aligned on trying to push for these things. And these are all things that are actually very bipartisan, right? So it's just a matter of, hopefully things getting done.
Yeah, and hopefully, right, the technology aspect can sort of inject the new kind of energy to have conversations on all these issues, right? These are all very important issues. It's just, how do you discuss and, sort of tackle those problems. Now, since you talk about mining, and I think the uniting force of our bipartisan support for your forum is actually China.
Yeah.
Competing with China is a very important theme that started actually in the first Trump administration and continued by the Biden administration, and now even more. Yeah. Let's talk about it, right? Because I think Silicon Valley's view of China has also changed from years ago, all about collaboration, and now. Can you share just what is the sentiment there?
You nailed it. I think people have realized that we weren't at the end of history. And that we were in great power competition, and that just de facto changes how you operate. And that's stemmed from the entrepreneurs and the founders that start these companies, that stem from the employees that are part of the journey with them in building these companies, and from the investor base that tries to support and partner with these founders. And so.
But what do you see in terms of China's competitiveness?
Yeah, I think they have advantages in certain areas, and one of the biggest ones is that they were more aware that they were in a great power competition ahead of us, and so I think
more government involvement.
I think more government involvement, and they made strategic decisions in light of knowing this reality. And I think the U.S. has been a little bit late to realizing this reality, but now that we do, we will do the right thing after we've exhausted all these other options. So.
But do you see any possibility of collaborating with them? And the reason why I ask that is because there are always two types of groups, right? Yeah. One advocates for more collaboration and partnership because China has so much that can offer to the world. Yeah. And it's almost like if you don't work with them, you're going to miss out half of the world's best. But it sounds like right now there's a shift to not working with them because of national security concern. Yeah. So how do you resolve this dilemma?
Like any foreign policy decision, there's a ton of nuance, and you're going to have to manage having relations with folks. Any administration that's going to be in power is going to have to deal with, and any country is going to have to deal with. And you saw that in the last Cold War, and you'll see that here. So you want good relations. You're going to need communication. You're going to need relations of some sorts, and especially here, we sort of have before we had mutually assured destruction, and now we have mutually assured economic destruction. And so I think it's going to be a lot of nuance in figuring that relationship out. But you need to have clear dialogue, clear relationships, and diplomacy. It always requires that. I'm no foreign policy expert, but I think that is just obvious from history.
But I think in Silicon Valley, you see so many
and I
people.
think in Silicon Valley, there's realization, of course, like all things. It's a broad industry. There's no trade associations. There's no one group that represents all their interests, which I think is a very good thing. And so you may have different degrees of the spectrum on what that looks like, and you'll have debate among friends, which is healthy. And I think for the most part, people realize that once again, we are in great power competition. We need to be tough on China, and we really need to invest in deterrence in order to make sure that the West, which includes us and our allies, are in a position of power and strength this century. That is always clear. The nuances of what decoupling looks like, where to be tough, where to be allies, where to work together, where not.
Details.
That's a lot of nuance. That will just it depends on so many factors. It's going to be very idiosyncratic. Yeah. But we will 100% approach that decision making not from the previous view that we had in previous decades, but to your point on sort of where the rest of the country and definitely the tech industry is coming at it from, which is realizing that they are an adversary and they're one we're going to have to also work closely with.
And I think that's also, kudos to the forum for aligning two giant, I would say, hubs in this country. One is political capital, the other is the innovation hub. To make sure the resources, the talent, the conversations are more aligned. So the country's national competitiveness can be more enhanced.
And I keep stressing this point, right? Even at the forum itself, we've had the VP of Taiwan. She's actually giving remarks again this year, which would be awesome. We have foreign representatives and ambassadors from other countries coming. We have a global contingent of companies. And I think that you'll see this realization that success here is a strong West, right? And a strong West includes the US and its allies. And all of us collectively embracing technology, having strong technology industries, and having Silicon Valley being able to continue to drive innovation and spread it to our allies will not only just benefit the US, right? It also benefits, us and our allies.
What are some of the most exciting innovations you're seeing that can be used in the defense industry that we should pay attention to? For example, I think your ventures early investor in SpaceX.
We've been SpaceX investors for almost 15 years, one of the largest investors there. Our goal is to just try to make great investments and drive good returns for our LPs.
Right.
We've been, early investors in Palantir. We're one of the largest investors in Anduril. But, we've also invested in companies across the board, from Uber to Airbnb to SolarCity, Gusto, Flexport. So although we invest across the board, a lot of our businesses do spend a lot of time in DC, but it's funny, it's not just the SpaceX, Palantir, Andurils of the world, right? Actually, for example, like Gusto and Flexport spend a lot of time here as well, trying to help policymakers and regulators.
Relevant to national security for sure.
Relevant to national security, but also having a strong economy, right?
Right.
And so I think that's particularly exciting. There are companies here that have spent time focusing on R&D tax credit reform to make sure small businesses and entrepreneurs are able to get tax credits to be able to operate their business better. And Flexport spends a lot of time trying to look at laws and regulations around ports and shipping, which helps maintain a strong economy here. And so it's exciting that across the board, everything we invest in does end up having to spend time here, and it's the nature of any large industry or large business. In particular, defense tech, what's particularly exciting, I think, you're seeing, I mentioned this before, but like a lot of our portfolio, from Palantir Anduril, but to Hadrian and various other companies, are really spending a lot of time on solving this manufacturing problem. And that's
manufacturing.
I think that's very exciting.
Interesting.
And you're seeing the tech industry start. Advanced component manufacturing is one. Being able to mass produce the next set of systems is one, right? So Anduril's focus is like, how can we, recreate what a automated factory looks like for our industry to mass produce, just like Tesla did with gigafactories, right, for their industry.
Does that mean we don't need engineers in the future?
No, if you look at Tesla, right, there's although they've relied on robotics a ton, right, they have a massive employee force, and they've brought thousands and thousands of jobs here in the country, right? So no, it turns out, Amazon is one of the largest employers in the country, and they've invested a ton in automation from a fulfillment perspective in their warehouses. So you see that when you invest in automation, it does not mean at the expense of jobs. It actually just creates more output. And so you can do more with less, or you can do more with the same workforce that you would have otherwise had, which yields more productivity.
So manufacturing, what about, I've seen some energy fusion related things.
Yeah, we invest less there, but that is something that's of critical importance. And a lot of, once again, we're just trying to convene folks to discuss, and a lot of companies in the energy sector are here, which is really, really exciting. Other places where we've invested have also been in cybersecurity, across the board enterprise software, and a lot of these folks are actually partners in here at the forum, like Applied Intuition and others. And it's very easy to forget that Mark Andreessen talked about software was eating the world a long time ago. That trend is still happening. There are still tons of our economy, a lot of our government that still doesn't have access to the best software and is operating on legacy systems. And that unlock alone will also just yield huge improvements in productivity and capabilities. And think about it from a defense perspective. Within the government, if it takes you weeks to know how many tanks you have, you can't make certain decisions on the fly, right? That should be done in seconds with software.
Right.
So I think even these things that we invest in are somewhat adjacent. Their work that they're doing to put the best technology in the hands of legacy industries or government will also yield similar impacts for a more effective deterrent strategy and national security.
Last question. Do you think we're in a Cold War now with China as the primary adversary? And so therefore, there's going to be some kind of regrouping of countries as well as even industries and investments?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think that's a trend that, once again, I think is becoming consensus. What that looks like will have a lot of nuance to it.
But for example, would you
100%.
guys invest in businesses that work in Russia or?
No, I think we want to invest in areas where we have an asymmetric advantage, and we're not going to have an asymmetric advantage in countries that we know very little about. We're not going to have asymmetric advantage in countries that are not our allies and that we can't trust the operating environment and know very well. So I think purely just from that perspective, we're not going to invest there. And I think the market is sufficiently large here in the U.S. and among our allies that we want to focus there. We have an advantage, and it is an additive benefit that when you invest in those areas, right, you're contributing and supporting the work for the U.S. and its allies in the West to ensure that they're successful in this current global power competition.
Yeah, the alignment is important.
The alignment is very important. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm sure this will continue to grow, and hopefully, not just 4 years, but as you mentioned, 40 years.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the goal.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for watching DC Insiders. Please follow us on social media to get the latest episode. See you next time.